The Adventures of Batman.
Welcoming you to the new adventures of Batman.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Batman on Film podcast. I'm your host, Garret Grev.
And
today,
Garret.
What?
No, not yet.
Yeah.
No,
What?
this is a different show. Welcome to Batmanimation. That's what this one is.
boy.
Episode 9. I am senior BOF contributor Ryan Lauer, and with me, you heard his angelic voice. Usually you hear it on the BOF podcast. It's Minnesota's finest, Garret Grev. A little confused here.
Ryan, my apologies. We should have talked about this in advance. I've been pretty derelict in my duties over on the main show, and I really need to get back into Bill's good graces. So, I jumped the gun. That's on me.
You did.
Can we just tell him that I hosted this one so I'm earning my senior contributor label? Or, I mean, I don't want to, you know me, I have a high sense of integrity. I don't want to do that. Listeners, we're going to get an actual BOF episode out that I will put together and do my duty for. It's been a little hectic. I'm coaching a bunch of kids in football this fall and work's been crazy. Yes. And if you hear me sniffling, I have been a victim of some sort of plague, but they got me on antibiotics. I'm on the comeback and I'm ready to talk about cartoons. So we'll do this the right way, Lauer. Thank you. For indulging.
Well, I think we're gonna just
graciousness.
I've got it here. Okay, here we go. Welcome to episode 9 of Batmanimation, a Batman on Film podcast, revisiting the animated adventures of the Caped Crusader. This is your Midwest co-host team, BOF senior contributor Ryan Lauer
and Garret Grev.
There, nailed it. There we go. Now we're back on track.
Look at Midwest brain.
Midwest brain. See, we never skipped a beat. Garret, it's always a real pleasure getting to talk on the podcast with my Texas roommate. You just kind of explained, so I can't even ask how you doing. You got through a plague. You're a survivor. I'm proud of you.
I'm a hero. I think some people would say. A lot of people in the face of adversity like this would just give up. I'm a big tough man. I don't know if you know that about me.
Oh yeah. Well, you're tall. You are a big man.
Yeah, I can lift heavy things. One of my best friends, one time we were moving. This was in our 20s, and I lifted a big heavy piece of furniture by myself. And he goes, "Did you just move that dresser all by yourself?" I said, "Yeah." I'm
a big man.
Does that make me a man? He goes, "It means you have the strength of a man." I was like, okay, that's fair. That's fair. But, big, strong men don't like to go to the doctor. And I was just suffering for so long. I went in finally they put me on all sorts of meds. And, 24 hours later, I'm actually able to record a podcast. I did not record my fantasy football podcast this week because of how rough a shape I was. So if Matt Renshaw is listening to this, he might send me some angry tweets about how I can show up for Batman and not for the fantasy bros.
You know what? Maybe all the fantasy bros, to get their Garret Grev fix, they will come to Batmanimation. So there you go. There's going to be a spike in downloads for this episode. I just know it. So, we're talking about how we're big men, we're big, strong men, and big, strong men love to talk about Batman and animation, specifically Super Friends. Even more specifically, the episode, The Superfriends Meet Frankenstein.
Hold it right there, Dr. Frankenstein. Your infamous family has created evil and fear long enough.
Oh, yeah. Frankenstein, the monster. Big, strong, I think it's man.
New
man
theme.
Of
big,
sorts.
strong man.
Yeah.
is the theme of this.
Breaking
discussion.
Things. We even get a big, strong Robin in this one, but I don't want to jump too far ahead. And seasonally appropriate, right? Like this is borderline a spooky.
This is as
spooky
episode. As Garret can get.
Oh yeah,
with content.
My tolerance levels. It's got to be child friendly for my tender heart. And of course, Super Friends was always good about that with the rather restrictive child entertainment guidelines of the 70s and early 80s until the great communicator Ronald Reagan broke those down, and we got to have G.I. Joe and Thundercats and Masters of the Universe to some extent.
What a time to be alive.
Yeah, what a childhood.
Tracking down some information on this episode was fun.
Oh
boy. One thing that I did happen to see was that this episode originally aired November 3rd, 1979. The show, I am not very knowledgeable on the Super Friends series itself and its different names and incarnations, etc. But at this point in 1979, it was called The World's Greatest Super Friends. Yes. And I saw a variety of things on the line on the interwebs. I saw like series 4, episode 7, and series they also meant was like season 4, episode 7. On the IMDb, this episode was season 1, episode 7. They have it marked down, but that I think is because of the incarnation of The World's Greatest Super Friends. Yeah. And then if you're listening and you haven't watched this episode, it's available on HBO Max on Super Friends season 5, episode 7.
A big curveball. So maybe if you take the season 4, which is what the listing I found also says, plus the IMDb of season 1, and you add those together, Brian, 4 plus 1 is 5, and HBO Max went with that. Maybe it's a little math lesson involved here. But
big strong men are also big smart men.
Yeah, you gotta have big strong brains. Yeah, that's advanced mathematics. I like to flex that in front of the children, so they know that dad's the big brain in the house. But the history of Super Friends is a weaving, storied history. I mean, very long run, number of different networks. Ryan Haas is actually a bit more of an expert on that subject. I've learned some things from him during the pandemic, when we're all sitting around at home, we weren't going anywhere or doing anything or seeing any people in real life. Digging into Super Friends history was something that I, a little rabbit hole I chased down for a couple of weeks, and I learned a bit, but it is, once you start getting into like DVD releases, that's where things are really wild, because that's just, it seems like there's no rhyme or reason across any of it.
Yeah, I mean, wild is just kind of it. I think that's why I don't know. It's hard to track down the information all this information that does line up. So yeah, our number one source to go to for this would be the sheriff himself, Ryan Haas, who any of you who haven't listened back, the first episode of Batmanimation was with Ryan Haas, and we actually talked an episode of Super Friends.
Yeah, so from the last season of Super Friends, which it really kind of marked a evolution in the animation style and direction in a number of ways. I think that's one of the most interesting things about Super Friends for me, is the different iterations across the timelines and the cast and sort of the focus. But that final kind of superpowers Super Friends series, that was some peak stuff. I think that was really the jumping board for a lot of what the DCAU ended up being. Kind of, you can find some roots back in that season. We're not talking about that season. We're talking about
when they met Frankenstein, and you mentioned it's very timely because yes, this is the Halloween season. Frankenstein, of course, and the Universal monsters are popular this time of year. And actually, I did not know this, and I have not watched these. I need to track them down. But this was the third time that the Super Friends met one of the Universal monsters, and that there's also an episode where they meet Dracula, and then I think the year prior to this, and then the year prior to that, they met the Mummy. So that's fun, future spooky material to track down next year. Maybe if Batmanimation's still around. I don't want to spoil any potential future episodes. Okay. I will share with the listeners that the Grev boys and I have watched just recently, because we're watching our spooky content in the Grev house. That doesn't mean you're watching whatever new Halloween movie comes out. Halloween, John Carpenter Halloween, that is, not like the weird Disney witch movies that you like. But we watched the Dracula episode, and the boys had some very interesting observations. And I got to share with them around children's entertainment guidelines and why we didn't see vampires just straight up biting people to turn them into vampires. They do it. They have an interesting twist on that for that episode, but we can save it for later. Yeah. Ooh, that's fun. Well, this episode is it's pretty fun. I like this setup is kind of basic, but then it goes to some places I wasn't expecting. So for this was the first time that I've watched this episode. IMDb summarizes it really briefly in one sentence and says, Dr. Frankenstein steals the powers of the Super Friends for his monster to use. That's part of it. But to break it down just a little bit further on what happens in this episode, Dr. Frankenstein wants revenge on the citizens of Transylvania for souring his great-great-grandfather's name. Meanwhile, on the other side of the earth, at the Hall of Justice, Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, Superman, goddamn Gleek, are all there at the Hall of Justice working on the bat plane, and they get the call that Frankenstein's monster is just like destroying Transylvania. And let me say, destroying, breaks into a restaurant, turns a table over, and then very gently sits a man nicely on a beam, and then exits said restaurant. But then he goes out and he flips a horse-drawn carriage with a woman inside and causes some real havoc. But they need the Super Friends to go and save the day, which then becomes a trap because Dr. Frankenstein gets Batman and Robin, then gets Superman and Wonder Woman, and he evolves his monster into a monster that I like to call Super Wonder Bat Stein.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Super Wonder Bat Stein, who somehow has the top half of Batman, the bottom half of Superman, and Wonder Woman's lasso.
And gauntlets. Like, not, not if any of her physical shows up, right? It's just her tools.
Yeah. And then now without their power, so the power is transferred into this new monster. So these Super Friends, they need to figure out without their powers, how can they stop this monster? Robin, of course, who then basically gets a power transfer, and he grows into monster size and has all the superpowers and helps save the day. Now that is an abbreviated version of this episode. Garrett, have you seen this before?
This was the first time I had seen this particular episode. And
what'd you think?
I thought it was great. I thought it was a great one. A number of things stand out. One, this iteration of Super Friends has a pared down roster compared to some of the earlier seasons. And even from the pared down roster of this season, it's further pared down. You don't have the Wonder Twins present. You don't have Aquaman present. For some reason, they have ventured on to Atlantis, leaving Gleek behind. Under the less than eyeful supervision of the remaining Super Friends. So they just allow him to monkey around with the junk pile and build his own little plane. But what was really interesting is Robin actually has something to do. He does. The story hinges on Robin. When you get down to it, it's a Robin episode. You don't get a lot of that.
It fits Batmanimation for sure, because Batman is pretty important to this episode. But I 100% agree with you of much like in Batman the Animated Series. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm forgetting the Robin origin story 2-parter.
Robin's Reckoning?
Robin's Reckoning. Thank you. It's a Batman series. Batman's important, but Robin's the star of that story.
Yeah.
Much like here too, which I wouldn't have necessarily expected going in.
Well,
so
you've got the Trinity.
What you already said.
Well, you've got the Trinity, right? You've got Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and it's Robin who has to save the day. There's the old switcheroo, right?
Yeah.
Not only is he not super powered, except for in this episode, but he's also the youngest member who's the sidekick, and the sidekick gets the feature role here. I thought it was also interesting to note this takes place in the current day. So this is the descendant of Dr. Frankenstein, who was not located in Transylvania in, either the Mary Shelley source material or any other iteration we can find. But for some reason, this was in Transylvania. We don't need to get into any sort of cancel culture conversation, but I also thought the depiction of Dr. Frankenstein was a little bit strange, because he should be like a German scientist, really, or a Transylvanian scientist. He seems to be some sort of Asian caricature in the facial description and facial hair, but doesn't have that accent. He almost looks like, oh gosh, who's the samurai? That shows up in later seasons of Super Friends. This is where I always get myself in.
Man, where's Ryan Haas? We need a Haas line
on podcasts. I don't know that I don't have the answer, but it almost looks like the sort of character design for what would become that samurai.
Interesting. I mean, maybe we've evolved as storytellers
it's just samurai.
Well, yeah. So you weren't wrong from the get-go of samurai later on.
And it looks just like Dr. Frankenstein.
Well, and there you go. I thought it was interesting. I actually looked up to see what the cast or the voice of, sorry about that buzzer, the voice of Dr. Frankenstein, because to me he sounded like the Burgermeister from Santa Claus is Coming to Town, the Rankin and Bass special, but it was not. But I swore it sounded just like him. He was voiced by Stanley Ralph Ross. See, that's all over the place because I could have swore it was also Gore, but he's listed as Gork in this. And I'm like, that's got to be Gore because like Igor,
right?
But then why? Yeah, Gore. So I think it's just a typo what I found online.
In fact, it wasn't. I had to listen to for that name a couple times because I thought the actor doing Dr. Frankenstein was maybe just doing an accent where the E before in front of Gore just wasn't emphasized. But no, they just call him Gore through the rest of the show.
Well, good, because it should be Gore, because I get that. That makes total sense. Let's see. The usual cast is returning of Danny Dark as Superman, Olin Sewell as Batman, Shannon Farnan as Wonder Woman, and Casey Kasem as Robin. With Frank Welker, I can't find what he did, but he's listed at the end of the episode with other, the voice cast list, and Frank Welker is Fred from Scooby-Doo, like everything Scooby-Doo except for the live action Freddie Prinze and the recent Scoob. Frank Welker does the voice of Fred. So there you go. And yeah, those are the really notable credits for this. So yeah, I'm with you on. I thought this was like it was a lot of fun. There's a fun, nostalgic, lighthearted vibe with like the look of this kind of animation, especially when they go with the the quote unquote creepy, because they do a lot of blending of like purple and blue. Scooby-Doo did that with all of their scary sets and stuff, and I really love that touch of always just going with not doing black, going purple and blue, and it gives a little bit of style, really old school. And of course Castle on the hill, and then
a lot of lightning strikes,
there's rain all over in this episode,
all
and
the
then
standards.
Transylvania itself, and how people are it's 1970s but still in that era. It's like people are still dressing in the 1800s.
Then there's horse-drawn carriages in the streets.
Exactly. And then here comes Batman flying in the Batplane. I mean, there's an era for you, right? But like all of that just adds a little bit to the charm, I think. And as I'm exploring, and I think I got to do the Super Friends series broken up too. I can't sit and watch it. I can't binge it for me, because I could start to be like, okay, this is starting to get too silly. But I really enjoy an episode here, then an episode there, then an episode here. And having watched this, and the last time I watched the Super Friends episode was for the episode that Haas and I talked about. Like it just ended up being a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think they're a ton of fun. It's sort of I use this analogy a lot. It reminds me of like the Pepsi versus Coke challenge of the late 80s or early 90s, where in the taste test, the subjects were given like a small amount of both, and small amount of both, Pepsi won. So then Coke was like, we need to change our formula, and they created new Coke, which was a huge failure, because it turns out like when you drink a whole can of that stuff, it's just too much, too sweet. Ryan Lauer probably wouldn't think it's too sweet. He likes it sugar on sugar.
Well, I need to ask you, let's pretend for a second that you do drink soda. Are you Pepsi or Coke?
Oh, I'd be a Coke guy.
Adam, boy.
Yeah.
I'm still a Coke guy.
Get me a Coke in a glass bottle, or a Mexican Coke with
real
sugar and not the corn syrup.
You know what they'd say down in Bill territory? All right, what kind of Coke?
Yeah, and I'd take a Coke. Yeah.
Coke.
Right. Yeah. Coke classic. Yeah. But like you can't binge the Pepsi. Too sweet. Yes. Can't binge Super Friends.
There it is.
Too lighthearted.
Look at that.
Now, Coca-Cola. That's Batman the Animated Series. Give me a 2-liter of that.
Yeah.
I'm crushing it.
I'm with it. There you go. I like that.
But both very good for what they are, right?
Exactly.
And that's, I think that's what makes this fun for me is the accessibility level. We fairly conservative parent when it comes to content my kids view, but I love sharing these superheroes with them. And I like to do the seasonal thing, right? We watch the Halloween spooky stuff, but not too spooky. Like Nightmare Before Christmas might be about the ceiling of the old Grev household. But this creates a great entry point for young viewers to be able to have fun with these characters, have fun with the seasonal type themes, but not have it be too much, right? Like it's a big scary monster. And why is this monster scarier and better and more dangerous than any monster any Frankenstein's ever created in the past? Well, he seems to be like remote controlled in this one. Like, this Dr. Frankenstein has a little microphone that he speaks into, and the bolts on the side of the neck, I think, are the receptors. So you can give him some direction, like, come back to the castle now. We're setting a trap, right? And he's like, and goes back to the castle. Until, of course, this Dr. Frankenstein isn't satisfied, right? He wants the biggest, best monster ever, which is like this sort of like putty body that he transfers.
Complete putty.
Right. Transfers the Trinity's powers into, or just gives them the lasso and gauntlet of the woman of the group. I was like, I don't know if that'd fly today.
What I did like, and I don't remember the exact terms that Batman used, but he definitely implied it's almost like, because Batman is human, his strengths are realistic and humanistic. It's like almost like took his smarts, took his intelligence and his intellect. Wit. Yeah. And it's like, hey, even in 1979, it was very much prevalent there of that's true to Batman's character in his form. Let Superman have the super strength, and Wonder Woman the super strength, and Superman the laser eyes and stuff. Let him have that, because that's also part of his character trait. So I liked that they didn't get too ridiculous, which is funny to say about this episode specifically.
Because it's pretty ridiculous.
In the Batman character. And so I really like that, but I do like what they did with Robin here, and giving Robin the spotlight for a little bit. The one to help break out at the castle and help Batman and get the Trinity out of there to, the Austrian Research Institute, because obviously that's their Energy Research Institute. And then he gets his own powers to stop. So I don't know.
It's fun. It's fun to see a super powered Robin. He's beefed up a bit, right? And he's going toe to toe with this monster. It was kind of interesting to me that so the majority of the powers, what seems like all of any superpowers or super intellect, was transferred from Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman to this new monster, leaving them basically defenseless. But then, like, there was just enough left in the tank that they can create one super-powered Robin on top of it. Like, and they
it's how it always works out, huh?
They kind of talk about, like, hey, they introduce like this ticking clock at the end of the episode. They have to beat the new monster and get everybody back in their spots to get the powers back to the extra now depowered Super Friends before they, I don't know, become zombies or die or whatever.
I know. I don't know what's really at risk here, other than
they didn't really define
a deadline.
Right, the deadline is the deadline, and that's what's pushing us towards the resolution of this episode.
Can you imagine you're like a little kid and watching this too, and you're like, they've only got 5 minutes, and then your parents be like, until what? Until 5 minutes is up.
Yeah, until the end of the episode.
So but I don't. It's so easy to accept too. I don't care.
I don't care.
He's got 5 minutes.
Yeah. This is fun. This is a fun episode. Go, Robin, go. And he does. And then you kind of get the little bit of humor at the end. It's like, it sure is great that we have everybody's powers back to where they belong. And Robin's like, I, for one, kind of enjoyed having superpowers. It's like, Robin, you silly child.
Hey, meanwhile, where's Gleek?
Yeah. And he's flying around, almost crashing into the pyramids for some reason. Because that guy, nav system is broken.
I don't know anything about this Gleek character. Nothing.
Yeah.
Always as annoying.
Oh, sure.
That was obnoxious. That was cringe to me. And maybe I'm missing out because he's a beloved character or something. I don't know. But God, I did not like this Gleek thing.
I bet Grant Morrison could do something awful with him. Like some sort of
Spicklick,
psychedelic history. Gleek. Yeah.
The new Trinity.
Yeah, Gleek is something else. Animation of this era love to have the cutesy animal sidekick for the kiddos to enjoy.
Scrappy Doo,
right?
Scrappy, Pete's favorite.
Gleek was pretty bad. Sorry, who doesn't like an adorable monkey? But this guy sucks.
How do you screw up an adorable monkey?
I don't know.
You make him not adorable and very annoying. So
right.
You said you watched this with the kiddos.
Oh yeah,
Okay, and what was this their first time? Well,
their
yeah, it had to
first
be. If
time
it was
with
your
it.
first time, probably theirs. So
Yep.
how did they react?
They loved it. They thought it was
Nice.
great. Even my oldest, my 10-year-old, was fixated and enjoyed it. So, and in some of these Super Friends things, every once in a while, he'll want to push back and say, no, let's watch, Superman, the animated series, or Batman, the animated series, something a little bit more skewing to 10 to 12 to 13-year-old, maybe.
Dad, I'm getting older now.
I don't know if you know this. Yes. If you don't know if you know this, I outgrew my old shoes. I'm becoming quite the man, So, but it was, he was aboard for it and really enjoyed it. All the boys enjoyed it. And then of course, immediately, I always forget when I show them superhero content, the next thing they want to do is run around the house and argue about who gets to be what superhero. And the older boys try to make, this is typically my 3 oldest, try to assign Wonder Woman on Benjamin, who's 5. And some outdated maybe gender norms on, oh, you have to be Wonder Woman. I'm like, listen, Wonder Woman would take out Batman if she really wanted to. I mean, maybe people would argue against that. Most likely they would, but don't Wonder Woman's no slouch, Benjamin. You'd be just proud. You wear your lasso with pride.
Yeah, got a lasso. It's pretty sweet, and an invisible jet. So come on, it's some good stuff. And the gauntlets, yes. Let's just go ahead and ask if there's a part in this that, yeah, why not? Let's say like your favorite. What stuck out to you the most?
I think I like the whole episode. We talked quite a bit about Robin. But what I enjoyed the most, or what I thought was pretty cool, aside from the weird visuals with Dr. Frankenstein, was just that opening set piece of what is really, whether it's Gore, Igor, Gork, but Dr. Frankenstein and Igor bringing this monster to life in a real deal, classic feeling, universal monster way, right? They're in the castle. There's a storm outside. It's dark. They open, this hatch at the top of this tower. There's lightning rods that go up. The creature's electrocuted. They lower it. He comes to life. The creator is shocked by the creation itself, and then he attacks the village. Like, that's classic feeling. They nailed that to kind of set this up as Super Friends really meet Frankenstein or Frankenstein's monster, as opposed to a Super Friends episode where Frankenstein's monster just happens to show up, and it could be Solomon Grundy or it could be whomever else in that monster role. Like that really set it in as, this is a Frankenstein story. Look where we're drawing our creative influences. We're going to do the things we're going to do because it's 70s Super Friends. But that's the basis and starting point. I thought that was just really smart.
Midwest brain.
Oh, nice.
I love that too, because I love setting the scene. And even though it's supposed to be 1979, it looked like 1800s.
Yeah.
In Transylvania for some reason. I don't care. It's a big old castle on a hill. And then down below is an old-timey village and a monster wreaks havoc on it. Give me all of that in a storm at night.
For this type of story, it's more important that it feels right more than it makes sense.
Exactly. Yep. And Super Friends doesn't require, except maybe that episode that we talked about before,
Fear Itself,
that goes deep. Yeah, it doesn't require you to have to go deep. Just sit back, enjoy the ride. And that's what I did with this one, not knowing what to expect. So I really look forward to visiting the Mummy and the Dracula episodes. Probably the Dracula more, because the Mummy, maybe an animated version of the Mummy will be more fun, because like the actual, like the Mummy, the monster, those movies I think are a bore. So we'll see what I think about the cartoon. I don't know.
Brendan Fraser isn't going to be in this to bring all the
well, then to hell with it.
Yeah, it's almost,
I don't know how old he would have been in 1977, but
he might have been born. He's probably was born. It's probably a 72 baby, something like that.
Wow. If I talk just slow enough
to get a little backward, because I think that was the reason the Tom Cruise Mummy movie failed, right? No Brendan Fraser.
He would have been 8 years old.
There you go.
That's perfect age to voice any character in that episode. So
right.
All right. Well, here's to hoping if we ever get to that episode on Batmanimation,
Brendan Fraser in some strange twist of fate was in that Mummy iteration as well.
That'd have been great. Do you have anything final to say before we just go ahead and wrap this puppy up?
I think it was smart to not include Aquaman in this, because I'm wondering what kind of weird fish gills would have been put on this monster and how they could have.
The monster could have just been silly.
Some scene in a lake. Yeah. It took it from being grounded and realistic to just pushing the envelope. They dive underwater, and Robin also has Aquaman's powers, and now they're like calling forth legions of fish to fight. Actually, now that I say it, maybe they should have done that, but whatever. I think the limited cast helped you focus. Yeah. Yes. Where's the plan, Warner Brothers?
Yeah.
Why haven't we announced a sequel to this? God, David Zaslav.
He doesn't respect animation.
No, he doesn't. We know that.
Yeah,
we know sure that. It's scientific fact.
I'm nothing else to say other. It was just fun. They reduced the Super Friends as a whole to an appropriate number, I think, to where there was enough to say it's the Super Friends.
Sure.
Meet Frankenstein, and not have it too many characters
and not enough Frankenstein.
So yeah, it kept it going. It was a fun little 20-minute episode. Batman and friends taking on a monster, not just friends,
super friends, not just super friends, the world's greatest super friends.
The world's greatest super friends. That's what it is. It's like that old toy of, it's Batman, but then you open it and there's a smaller version. It's the world's greatest super friend, Super Friends. You open that up and then it's just the world's greatest super friends. You open that up, the Super Friends Meet Frankenstein. That's how we got there.
Russian nesting doll.
I'm great. Yeah, man, you got all the knowledge today.
KG Beast. What?
Yeah. Give me that twist. He just shows. Anyways, Garrett, thanks for hopping on to Batmanimation.
Hey, thanks for having me. Sorry, I tried to host it right away.
It's okay. I understand. Usually, I mean, if I don't chime in with the Batman, then it's Garrett. Hello, citizens of Gotham. So this is a fun co-hosting deal. We're a package deal right now.
Hey,
for this. So if you have anything to plug, you want to go ahead and plug away?
Oh gosh. If you are looking for a 6-week-old episode of the Batman on Film podcast, you can head over to this. Well, you don't have to head anywhere. It's on this very same feed. You can go back and listen to that. If you would like to listen to me talk about fantasy football, you can check me out along with my co-host Matt Renshaw, the Dynasty Dads podcast. We're sponsored by Dynasty Trade Calculator. If you're in a dynasty league trying to get some advice on what kind of trade to make or not make, you can head over to that website. You'd follow us at Twitter, on Twitter at Dynasty Dads. And if you just want to interact with me, because I talk about, a lot of Batman, fantasy football, my kids, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, various memes, whether they be Vikings or Batman related, you can get all my goofy stuff over there. I am at Garret Wato. That is at GarretWato. We can chat it up. I'm a chatty guy.
There you go. He knows how to talk. Okay.
Yeah.
Mine's simple. Go to batmanandfilm.com. You find reviews there, as well as interviews. Most recently I got tagged into the podcast and talked to Sean Murphy. So there you go. Do a double feature of podcasts, interviewing Robert Venditti and then interviewing Sean Murphy. There you go.
Some of the hottest creators ever. Right on the feed, man.
Right on the feed. And then also, if you want to hear some more talk about fun Batman nerdy things, follow my podcast, The Batman Book Club, at The Batman BC on Twitter. Episodes are also posted on Batman on Film. And actually, this man right here, Garret Grev, has recently been on for the Spooky Stories month. So go ahead and track that down and give it a listen. So, that being said, thanks for listening to Batmanimation. We'll be back soon before you know it, and we'll let announcer Rachel take us out.
Thanks for listening to Batmanimation, a BatmanOnFilm.com podcast revisiting the animated TV and film adventures of the Caped Crusader. Follow Batmanimation on Twitter at Batmanimation. Follow BOF on Twitter at The Batman on Film. Follow Jet on Twitter at Batman on Film. For Jet and Team BOF, I'm announcer Rachel. Batman on Film, authoritative, definitive, the original. Established in 1998.